Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So these scriptures here help you see a very key part of my story, which has to do with me arguing that Christ is the Son of God and not the Father, and that faith without deeds is dead. And so the argument in regards to Christianity specifically, in regards to the divine order on YouTube, it started maybe in 2013 or 14 when I started going on and on about how my top martial arts challenge has proven spiritual power, and that sparring shows spiritual power, and that is an example of deeds. It's an example of the top way to show who was chosen by God, not mere speculation, not so-called miracles that people claim to have witnessed, but actually something that you know for sure that you can find reliable and trustworthy. So let's go to 1 Timothy 2:9, and let's consider logic, order, who was deceived and who, struggled to tell the truth and was persecuted and just simply made minor mistakes, which is not the same as being deceived by the devil. Okay, so first I'm going to read through 1 Timothy 2:9 through 15, and what I wrote after that, then I'm going to explain it. I also want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. A woman or wife should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or assume authority over a man or husband. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first and then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived, it was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But a woman will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Now for what I wrote. I, Christ, do not permit people to say that they are equal or greater than I am, or to have authority over me. As David proved his point in the story by facing Goliath and being the top at single combat, which is the top way to prove spiritual power. And others were deceived or cheating me and ignoring this. So other people here on this planet, like their forefathers basically, were deceived into following other paths and cheating me out of my right to lead, or simply ignoring the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. That wasn't their argument. Even these Afrocentric guys, they're arguing for Freemasonic orders. They're arguing for, mere sports, mere gimmicks, not the true, morally precise Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order, proven through valid outdoor sparring, challenges, competitions, proven through true identity, what have you. They make stuff up. They have cult trances. They have cult arguments. They have nonsensical arguments, and you should be able to tell right away when you hear them. You should be able to tell the difference between them and me immediately. Okay. So now let's explain it. So basically, he says, I also want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. So he's saying that these good deeds are important, and that the expensive stuff not only is not important, but you shouldn't wear it. You should be making your case for your worth by having good deeds, treating people fairly, especially me. And he talked about how modest dress is decent dress. It's proper. It's proper in a divine sense, not a mere human sense. What usually comes to mind is proper English, right? Not that's just mere human rules, customs, and traditions. And he says that the good deeds are appropriate for women who profess to worship God. So they claim that they worship God. They claim to be a Christian. They claim to have faith, right? So where are their good deeds? He says a woman or wife should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man or husband. She must be quiet. Now, when he starts there, when you understand the history of the behavior of males and females, there's a bunch of pagan ruffians everywhere. Okay? So in this part, he just happens to be talking about females. Now, he might have been misogynistic. I don't know. But I do know that if you think this through, that it makes sense. However, I don't agree with him putting it the way he did because it causes a lot of conflict. And he himself says things, like he doesn't want people to go on about endless genealogies and stuff like that because it causes conflict. But he puts it in a way that is very likely to cause conflict, and it has caused conflict. Okay, so let's see how he justifies it. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. Now let's stop there. He is actually basically wrong about this, depending on how you translate it and interpret it. If you translate it the way this person did in the New International Version, and if you interpret it the way it seems like it should be interpreted, then he's wrong. Was the woman the only one who was deceived and became a sinner? No. They both were punished by God. But in that part of the story, God makes it clear that the man is above the woman. Okay? Because she led the charge for him to be deceived. It's like the government leading the charge to turn, people in the ghetto from all races into criminals. So they're the most guilty and they get the most punishment. The governing class, the churches who are pretending they do no wrong, what have you. They led the charge for the deception that led to the bad behavior. And it led for them becoming sinners. He goes on to say, but women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Now, all those people who argue that faith is all you need to be saved, you should put your hand above your mouth on your mouth because you've played the fool and exalted yourself. You thought that you knew better than me. Okay? You thought you knew better, and you were wrong. When it comes to these issues, you might know about cars more than I do. You might know about insignificant stuff, but when it comes to these vital issues, you do not know better than I do. So it says, but women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. First of all, it's not talking about actually having a child. Because even Paul in his letters says you're better off not having sex at all. So how's he going to go from saying that to saying, hey, go ahead and, be saved by having a kid? It's not saying that. And we see that in Galatians 4, which is also part of Paul's letters, where it says that more are the children of the woman in the spiritual realm, okay, and the woman on earth. More are the children of females who died for God and didn't have any physical kids than females who stayed and kept reproducing. More are the children of the Jerusalem in the sky, okay, which doesn't exist here on earth. And the Jerusalem on earth, it's where these people live and they're having kids and so on and so forth. So Galatians 4 clarifies that. That's the tactic the Bible often uses. Now, there's a bunch of ignorant people that historically have trouble with reading comprehension. Some are even illiterate. Do you want to teach it that way? No. Because that guarantees that a lot of people will be thrown under the bus, right? Now let's go back to who was deceived and why. Now let's look at this thing here. When it comes to baseball, which is different than life judgment, it's different than, these females who quite often run a business very well, okay? If you throw a baseball at the average female, not at them, and when you play baseball, females historically tend to play baseball in an inferior manner than guys, right? Their brain has trouble coordinating their body in a way that causes them to effectively respond to the pitch, okay? And they swing and miss quite often more than males do. Now, it's not a coincidence that they're also called tricks because they're quite often tricked into dating guys who are scum. So if you're going to forge a church order and God is a warrior, do you want someone who is an inferior warrior teaching warrior matters? No. And I mean martial arts, not being a soldier in the military. I mean, outdoor sparring, what have you. However, if we're going over this scripture and I think that, that I'm quoting Timothy and it's really something else, and a female says, hey, that's not Timothy, it's this, and I remember it by saying this, which is a form of teaching me. Is she allowed to do that? Yes. but she's not allowed to exert authority over me. Or if she's married and they're in the divine order, again, and if they're in the divine order, okay, if they're actually obeying God, she's not allowed to exert authority over her husband. She's supposed to masterfully pick a husband. Her chance to exert authority over male-female matters has to do with making the decision to choose who to marry. Okay, when they choose that person, they're choosing someone to have authority over them. When women choose to obey God, they're choosing to have me have authority over them. And if someone is in the divine order when they get married, they're choosing to have that male exert authority over them. You see what I'm saying? Now, if a guy really loves his wife, he's going to make sacrifices. He might want, to buy one thing and she wants to buy another thing, and he does it her way. He might want to eat one thing for dinner and she wants to eat something, and he does it her way. So in her own way, she's exerting a form of authority that is allowed. But when the man puts his foot down and says, I'm the head of this household, she's supposed to comply, including in the bedroom. And Paul even touches on that in a different part of the Bible. Okay. So is it misogynistic to say that a woman should learn in quietness and full submission? Should some female argue with me about what the divine order is? Should she argue with me about whether faith must come with works? Should she argue with me about the form of sparring? Okay. She doesn't know about these things. I know God, she doesn't. So there's a certain order. And just like the females tend to be inferior martial artists, okay, and martial is marital scramble, Christ is the bridegroom, the Lord is the warrior, and on and on and on. And I have like 42 scriptures, and there's more than that I've written down that prove that it's a martial art order. Okay, so there's Psalm 18, okay, Psalm 89. There's quite a few of them. Exodus 15:3, Isaiah 42:13, on and on and on. Proverbs 34. Okay, so why wouldn't it be that way? Well, it is that way. And a woman should be happy to be a woman and to be herself. And just like males who aren't me should be happy that they're in the divine order if they are, and they should be content with that, without the con. No conning. No wordplay, just content. I don't use wordplay. I don't speak in code. Okay, so let's look at what I wrote next. I, Christ, do not permit people to say that they are equal or greater than I am, or to have authority over me. As David proved his point in the story by facing Goliath and being the top at single combat. So let's stop right there. In the story in 1 Samuel 17, all the other Jews fled. So David was set apart. And the king said, whoever defeats Goliath can marry my daughter, thus becoming married and grafted into the royal house of the royal family. You see what I'm saying? So he's put above these other guys. And over time, with that same warrior spirit, he replaces Saul instead of Jonathan, who was Saul's son. Okay? So the flesh is not as important as the spirit. And it says that in Proverbs, that a prudent servant will rule over a disgraceful son. David was the servant of God and of the king. And Jonathan was his son. Though Jonathan wasn't disgraceful, he stood with David, he did a lot of things that were respectable. Someone who was more prudent than his son, even though he wasn't disgraceful, ruled over him. He became king. And what David said to Goliath, right, when all the Jews fled and he faced him, he said, this day I will strike you down and cut off your head, and feed your flesh to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. So what he cited as someone that Christ said he's the root and offspring of is that when he defeats Goliath in martial combat, okay, Goliath was like, hey, what the hell are you bringing sticks for? Why are you using a sling? Okay, and he said, well, he made the decision to say, well, that doesn't matter because I have all this armor on and this big shield. But he was supposed to face him toe-to-toe, man-to-man, right? But when Goliath made that call, without anyone having him under mind control or fuming him or whatever, he had agreed to those terms, okay? And that was a flaw in his character, what have you. It has to do with mind, body, soul, spirit. And so David beat him, not by tricking him, okay? He beat him by being in the Spirit of God, because if he had missed, he's done. And part of martial arts is understanding trajectories and speeds of items and so on and so forth. Okay? I would never consent to that. I would never agree to what is ridiculous, which is someone bringing a gun to a sparring match, okay, or to a single combat with weapons. But Goliath had agreed to that. And David has cited that the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel and that he's moving through David. You see what I'm saying? There's no other way to interpret that. There's a God in Israel. He chose David. The other Jews fled. They didn't rise to the occasion. They didn't rise to the occasion in regards to the challenge, which goes back to my legal and peaceful top martial arts challenge, which I've had since 2013, which I've won. And they've done some trickery and fuming and poison, and they still couldn't beat me. So that's the top way to prove spiritual power. And others were deceived into ignoring that part of the story or misrepresenting the form of competition and things of this nature. Okay? And if they weren't deceived into doing that, which in a sense all of them were, no matter how you slice it, they were cheating me out of my right to lead wittingly or otherwise, with no viable counterargument. So therefore, no one has the right to say that they're equal or greater than me, using a scale that is basically identical to the scale that he's using. You see what I'm saying? And the Lord detests dishonest scales, what it says in Proverbs in more than one place. And Proverbs is a book in the Bible for understanding the riddles, the sayings, the parables, etc. of the wise. That's what it says in Proverbs 1 in the first section. Watch this video several times to make sure you understand my argument well. Take notes, put in your own words. So if you ever have to explain it to someone, you can explain it in a way that you find sufficient. Keep in mind, I'm being fumed and poisoned, and they're making it harder for me to explain. But that just goes back to Matthew 5, where it says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And Christ also elsewhere in the story says, "No servant can be greater. If they persecuted me, they'll persecute you too. And they'll try to persecute me again under certain circumstances," right? And so you get that it lines up that I am the Christos, okay? And as Paul was making rules for males and females, he put himself above them with a much, weaker justification than being Christ come back. Okay, so that should pretty much explain that for you and have it clear to you that I'm right. And again, in regards to the deeds, 1 Timothy 2:10, it says, he wants these women adorned with good deeds. And he goes on to say in verse 15, "But women will be saved through childbearing, if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety." And those things require deeds. How do you know someone's holy? By their deeds, by their actions, by their fruits. How do you know someone's showing love? Okay, love your neighbors yourself by what you do. And you see in John 8, verse 38, for example, it says, "I am telling you what I have seen in the Father's presence, and you are doing what you have heard from your own father." His complaint to the Jews was what they were doing. In Galatians 3:28, it says there's no Jew or Gentile. If we go to verse 39, it says, "Abraham is our father," they answered. "If you were Abraham's children," said Jesus, "then you would do what Abraham did." And we see in Galatians 4, it's talking about Sarah and Hagar, the wives of Abraham. Okay. And, he says, Sarah in the sky is our mother, right? Jerusalem in the sky is Sarah, our mother. So Paul is saying that the Gentile as well as the Jew are also, when they're in the divine order obeying God, that they're the children of Sarah and Abraham. Okay. Now, going to verse 40. "As it is, you are looking for a way to kill me," what they're doing, right? And what they're not doing. "A man who has told the truth that I heard from God. Abraham did not do such things." So if you were the children of God, then you would do what the righteous do, and you wouldn't cheat me out of my right to lead. You would automatically rally to me. And destiny would make it so that people around the world would find their way to me if they were the sheep of God, the children of God. So that's how God works. He created the heavens and the earth. He ordered things a certain way. The sands on the beach, the mountains, the clouds, you name it. Things are where they're supposed to be. And when they're lost, they find their way before time is up. He goes on to say that in verse 42, Jesus said to them, "If God were your father, you would love me, for I have come here from God. I have not come on my own. God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say." Now, verse 44, again, is not being anti-Semitic. There's a reason why they don't want you to think about this verse, because it proves my point to a T. says you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. So why is he saying that? He's saying it because they're Jews? No, he's saying it because they want to carry out the devil's desires. They want to behave like the devil. They want to do the deeds of the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native tongue, for he's a liar and the father of lies. So you're lying by your actions, by cheating me out of my right to lead. And there's also the example of Cain and Abel. What was Cain's problem? He was jealous of Abel. The elite are extremely jealous of me because I'm the top martial artist ever possible, and they're just one of over 50 million people on this planet who are millionaires or billionaires who exert some kind of power. In many ways, Elon Musk has more power than King Charles. In many ways, Elon Musk has more power than Joe Biden and vice versa. So they're just another rich person that exerts power, dime a dozen. There was a time that when there wasn't even 50 million people on the planet. There's not 50 million people in California or Israel. And in many European countries, there's not 50 million people. But there's 50 million rich people, who are worth millions and billions on the planet. And in some countries, if you're worth tens of thousands, you're considered rich in some countries, in some areas. So when you look at this thing, okay, they're jealous. They're doing the deeds of the devil. And it goes back to females on the street. Okay, my sheep hear my voice. If they were right with God, when they come across me at this time, they would make sure that they know who I am, that they exchange numbers, that they have my information. They wouldn't lose me. And if I tried to talk to them or I show signs that I'm interested, they would love me. They would love me in every way possible because I'm Christ, the bridegroom. Okay? It says, and keep in mind, if they're married or they're dating, because their relationships and their marriages are invalid. And only I can make them valid. But most of them aren't wise enough to get to there. So we'll keep it simple for you and say certainly it's clear in those who are single. So it says, but I'm right either way if you think about it. If God were your father, you would love me. If God were your father to all the churches, Mormons, Catholics, Pentecostal, Adventist, Amish, right? Jehovah's Witness, on and on and on, right? Lutherans, if God was your father, your women would be madly in love with me at first sight. You're single women. They're not. Because they desire the things of the devil, because they're the children of the devil. And the devil was a murderer who wants to date the murderers, and one who slackens his work is brother to one who destroys. Proverbs 18:9. He's a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth. And I am the truth, not what you're teaching them in your churches. If you taught them correctly in your churches, then they would rally to me. But instead you're teaching them lies. Because your ways and your paths are the paths of liars and the ways of liars. Well, I am the way, the truth, and the life. One thing I'd like to add is that if a female I deem suitable, who's attractive to me, especially after they argue with me about whether I should be able to date an attractive female, right? If a female was to submit to me, okay, that she would be doing some of the reading. And in a sense, she would be teaching people. So when you look at what Paul is saying, in a broad sense, it's not specific enough. Okay? It's the difference between the sharp, double-edged sword of Scripture and the broadsword of the devil, some brute swinging a broadsword to no avail. Okay? And being outmaneuvered by the sharp top martial artist ever and easily defeated.